Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chatting with the G-Man. And if you didn't know, I am the G-Man. And we want to give you an update on Hurricane Irma, which has really devastated the Caribbean and Florida throughout the weekend, and even today, its onslaught is still being affected. Its devastation is still being impacting the Florida coast and the whole state of Florida by now. We want to recognize my wife, Lady T, Teresa Jeanette Scott, also Marietta Harper, one of our friends from First AME Church, the first church I pastored. Thank you for joining us. George, we're glad to see that you're watching us as well. So we're going to give you an update on Hurricane Irma. First of all, Irma has been downgraded to being a tropical storm, but its devastation is continue to be felt throughout Florida in spite of the fact it's a tropical storm. As you know, a hurricane is measured at about 75 miles an hour and up. A hurricane 1 all the way to a hurricane 5, they're measured from 75 on up. And the higher the winds, naturally, the higher the number is. But a tropical storm is just is 70 miles an hour winds. That's where it peaks, at 70 miles, 74 miles an hour winds. Right now in Florida, the winds are 70 miles an hour, and at times it gusts to 80 and even 100 miles an hour, even under the system of it being a tropical storm. So this devastation is still being felt. So far, and we say so far because we don't know until everything concludes and the storm is gone, well, how many people will ultimately be a part of the death toll. But right now, the death toll from Hurricane Irma is 30. And this is across the Caribbean and in the United States so far. Irma is right now in northern Florida, working havoc on Jacksonville, Florida. And it's heading toward Georgia and South Carolina. And they're saying even the impacts of it, the afterflow of it, will go as far north as Pennsylvania, where we live, and up into New York and further. That time to be a tropical depression, if not just a rainstorm. But still, its impact. They call it a monster storm, not so much because of its violence, though it's violent enough, but because of its huge. It's a huge storm. It still is impacting Miami, Florida, though slightly now, all the way up to South Carolina and even the tips of North Carolina. That's how big this storm is, being called a monster storm. It hit the Caribbean islands at a Hurricane 5 force, with Hurricane 5 force winds. It hit Miami at 104, and then when it got to Tampa, it was about a 1 category storm. And now, of course, we know it's a tropical storm now, and it will soon be a tropical depression and just a rainstorm ultimately. But it's going to drop rain throughout the whole East Coast on one level or another. Certainly not like the level of Florida and the Caribbean. So we want you to, once again, like we said with Hurricane Harvey, anyone that has a heart to give and to support and donate for those who have been displaced, those families who have lost loved ones and the like, you can call Red Cross, you can call the state where they live, find out what their conditions are, what agencies are available to assist them, and then to assist them in donations and both financially and even stuff like clothing and shoes and other items, food items and the like, whatever is needed. We ask that you remind yourself and remember those in Puerto Rico, those in the Bahamas, those in St. Thomas, St. Croix, the Virgin Islands, as well as Florida and up and down the seacoast here in the north. Last week we had Harvey. This weekend and even today and for the next few days, we're going to have to deal with Irma. And then there's another storm that's in the Atlantic Ocean called Jose. And the same eastern region is bracing itself for whatever impact that hurricane will have, Hurricane Jose. So it's really something, this back to back to back. Virtually every week, we've had some sort of hurricane impact parts of the United States. Harvey in the Gulf Coast, mainly Texas and Louisiana. Now we have in Miami, in the Caribbean islands, we have Irma. And we don't know exactly where Jose is going to be, will hit landfall. They're talking about even as far north as it'll hit landfall in Georgia, in South Carolina, and even further north. Of course, the further north you go, the colder the water is, and the devastation won't be quite as great. But no matter what you talk about, I mean, these storms behind each other are really devastating this nation. The president and the government has pledged support for them and relief support for them, and we hope that they carry through with that to the maximum that we're able to carry through, because these people are going to be displaced for many, many months and even years. Hurricane Katrina, there are still people that are displaced, people that still are not back in their homes yet, and that was Hurricane Katrina, which is a few years ago. So we know that the recovery efforts aren't overnight. It'll soon be out of the news, we know that, within the next week or two. It's like we don't talk much about Harvey anymore, but we know that the devastation of it will continue for a few years before they're back to what we call a semblance of normalcy. Good afternoon, Andrew, one of my childhood friends from Derby. We want to also remind you that today is 9/11, September the 11th, 2017, and we remember September the 11th, 2001, when the World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists, where they went into Pennsylvania, and they also hit the Pentagon there in Washington, D.C. Our hearts and our minds and our prayers are with those families that are still recovering, and with those people that were injured, that are still affected by their injury all these many years later. 16 years later, people are still suffering under this brutal attack of terrorism that took place on September the 11th, 2001. So our minds and our hearts and our prayers are extended toward them as they now enter another anniversary of this devastating terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in a small town in Pennsylvania, and of course in Washington, D.C. there in 2000. Thousands of people died as a result of those attacks. And that means thousands upon thousands of families and friends and loved ones. Those who were first there at the scene, firemen, policemen, EMS workers, and others who were there to help. Many of them were injured. Many of them died, gave their very lives to help others escape the devastation of that moment. And so we certainly do remember them as well on this week of a lot of storms, and this week of reflection on what took place on 9/11, 2001. Today we're going to deal with an issue that I think you can consider maybe controversial. Certainly it's a very hard line, very in-depth issue, something that we've been dealing with for a while and continue to deal with. As you know, over the centuries, even here in the United States, the lives of people with challenged abilities, people with disabilities, if you will, have been devalued, have been ignored, have been disadvantaged, have been demoralized, along with stats that indicate that most people with disabilities live impoverished lives, experience more instances of police brutality and domestic and institutionalized abuse than any other group in this nation, along with many within our federal government and our state government. You know, this was a fight earlier this year about trying to dismantle, trying to reduce the impact and even eliminate programs like Medicaid and Medicare and other benefits, entitlement benefits that help and support persons with physical, developmental, and mental challenges, as well as those with pre-existing conditions, and how just by a hair Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, which protected people with these conditions, was almost repealed and replaced by a more stringent, less compassionate health care bill. The legislature in the House of Representatives, they passed the bill. That would have been very restrictive, but the Senate could not pass the bill by one person's vote. Senator John McCain, ironically a Republican himself, he went against his party and voted his conscience. And because he voted his conscience, the bill did not pass in the Senate by one vote. And because it was not passed in both houses of Congress, the Affordable Care Act still is the law of the land. Medicaid still has not been touched yet. But as we said before, it's not just the federal government that feeds into these programs, but the state government has its share of it too. It's not these programs. Let me be clear about this. These programs are not just funded by the federal government. They are also subsidized by the state governments. I know that many of us from our community here in Philadelphia are going to Harrisburg. I'm seeing whether I can go up there to Harrisburg. I went before, many times before, in fact, to protest and to make sure that the state legislature here in the Keystone State does not change in a drastic and a damaging way their participation in Medicaid and Medicare, in particular Medicaid in this instance. George says, I say no to cuts, and so do I. No to cuts. We're not going to allow this to happen. We stopped it before. The pressures of those who have physical, developmental, and mental challenges, those in particular who had physical challenges, we rallied. Many of us were put in jail fighting against this, and we won, even if it's temporary. But now we got to keep the fight going in these state houses, in these state buildings, in these state offices. We got to go to our state representatives and our state senators, which are different than our United States senators. Find out who your state senator is. Find out who your House of Representative member is in your particular state. And let them know, as George has said, no to cuts. That will cut out you having AIDS, and certainly the hours that they have, they will be cut back and cut out and eliminated if they have their way. Many persons that live in an assistive living condition will now have to go back into institutions, nursing home, rehab centers, and the like. Things will be drastically different. You won't be able to get medical care that you need, when you need it, and how you need it, if they make these cutbacks on any level, whether federal or state. And don't you think, dear hearts, that the Republican-led House of Representatives and Senate in the United States Congress, or the White House with Donald Trump and his crew, have just let this issue go? They're stepping back. They're dealing with other things. Certainly the devastation of these natural disasters are occupying their attention. But don't you think that they're going to ignore it? It took Obama quite a few years to get Obamacare passed. He said it in 2008. It wasn't until 2010 and even 2012 that it was really implemented in its fullness. So it doesn't, just because he didn't do it the first year of his administration, does not mean that this administration, nor the Senate, nor the House of Representatives, or the federal government will not deal with this issue again. And keep in mind, these issues are also being dealt with right now in the state capitals. So wherever your state capital is, Harrisburg, Trenton, New Jersey, Dover, Delaware, wherever you may be, Albany, New York, wherever you may be across this nation, make sure that you contact your governor. Make sure that you contact your state senators and your state representatives and let them know no to cuts. No to cuts to children of impoverished families. No in cuts of programs for those who have disabilities and those who have pre-existing conditions. No to those who are senior citizens amongst us. No to any cut that will impact negatively the lives of millions upon millions of citizens of this nation. But let me say this. There is a more insidious attack than these are, and these are devastating enough. But there's a more insidious attack against the disabled community. And we're going to deal with that today. And the question of our discussion to you is this. When are the lives of the disabled worth eliminating? And how far will it go? When are the lives of the disabled worth eliminating? And how far will it go? Bishop said, Bishop, you know what sucks. What, George? Would you want to state what you're concerned about before we get into our topic? Okay, well, let's move right on into it. How physically challenged, how developmentally challenged, how mentally challenged, how must a person be before it's decided that person's life has no worth? That person's life should be eliminated. That they should end their life. Where does it start and where does it end? Who determines whose life is worth saving? Whose life is worth living? Who determines that? And how far does it go? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about it beginning with what we call euthanasia, better known as mercy killing. Now I'm going to give you some definitions, and I want you to think about these definitions. First, there is under euthanasia what we call assisted suicide. Now, assisted suicide is when you kill yourself or someone kills themselves with the assistance of somebody else. George says, I have ASL, which is a form, of course, of muscular dystrophy. Now, I know what you mean. It's not much money we get. That's true. Once you pay your rent and all of that and other things that you need, it's not much left. We are impoverished. We are the most impoverished group in the nation. But they want to eliminate us. They tried it through legislation with these bills that would have eliminated some of the entitlement benefits, but they're doing it in other ways too. Yes, for housing does have a long waiting list on them. There's not enough housing. But let's get back to our issue. So assisted suicide is when I kill myself, but someone else gives me the tools by which to kill myself. That's assisted suicide. Someone gives you a pill. Someone gives you the needle. Someone gives you the medicine that you need to take or whatever you need to take to kill yourself. Assisted suicide. Most time it's a physician-assisted suicide. Next is voluntary euthanasia. Someone else kills me with my consent. So the first one is assisted suicide. I kill myself, but you give me the tools. You give me the pills. You give me the medicine. You give me the injection. You give me whatever I need, the hypodermic needle and all of that I need to kill myself. That's assisted suicide. But voluntary euthanasia is when someone else kills me with my consent. The third is non-voluntary euthanasia. Someone kills me when I'm unable to give my consent. In other words, a person is in a vegetative state and they cannot articulate their opinion one way or another. So someone else decides to end your life, many times with the approval of family or physicians or someone else, but it's really you're having no say in the matter at all because you're unable to have an opinion, at least to verbalize it. You may have an opinion. They even say people in comas understand what's going on. People in certain vegetative state understand what's going on, but they cannot articulate it through speech. And the fourth is involuntary euthanasia. That means someone kills me without asking me, therefore without my consent. They see that I'm suffering. They don't ask me really for my consent, but I just see you're suffering, and so I decide that you don't need to suffer anymore, and so I determine that you can't go through with it any longer. You can't endure this any longer, so I decide that your life now is worth taking. Assisted suicide? Yes, Teresa, it does. She says, sounds like murder. It does, doesn't it? In fact, I think all of these things border, if not sound like it, certainly border on it. And that last one, certainly involuntary euthanasia is murder. But these are the four methods or reasons why someone is euthanized. There is no country in the world where the disability rights movement is supporting euthanasia. The question is, why is that? Well, think about it. Think about it for a moment. The euthanasia groups and those who believe in the right to die movement say there are safeguards against abuse of euthanasia, meaning that, I can just kill because I want to kill. There's safeguards that protect people from being carte blanche killed. The first is, there are four, and these are the safeguards that people that are right to die movement suggest are safeguards. The first is, euthanasia is for terminal conditions, which is defined by most healthcare systems as 6 months before death. So you're terminal. There's no way that you're gonna live past 6 months, and so what's the point in continuing your life? Terminal conditions. That's the first thing. That's a safeguard. So you have to be in that category. That's what they say. Secondly, they say that the purpose of euthanasia is to abolish physical pain. So we abolish physical pain by ending your life. The third safeguard, they say, is the person has to give an informed consent. And the fourth is euthanasia is about self-determination. I have a right to decide whether I want to die or not. These are the four safeguards, quote unquote, that the right to die movement uses in defense of euthanasia. Well, that person has to be terminal, had no more than 6 months to live. The person it abolishes pain, excruciating pain. I mean, why go through this extreme pain? It will end their pain. No longer will they have pain. This is a good reason for euthanasia. Person has to give their informed consent. And finally, everybody has a right to choose whether they want to live or die. Now let's examine these four safeguards, quote unquote, that the right to die movement uses. The first is, they said, terminal condition. The person must be terminally ill. No hope to live a life of value, no hope in living an extended life. Within 6 months, they probably are going to die. So why let them linger on for 6 months? Let's just end their life right now. This position has been really abandoned by every right to die advocate around the world. Terminal is too limited in its ability to cover every instance where they want to end a person's life. In other words, the right to die says, the condition you got to be within 6 months of dying is too limited. It should be a broader reason for us to kill you. More reasons for us to kill you. Terminal illness should not be the only condition. So really, they're not even arguing about terminal illness conditions anymore, terminal illnesses anymore. They've moved past that because it's too limiting. Someone has to, if you're going to be dead within 6 months to a year, then we should be able to pull the plug. Or not pull the plug so much, but we should be able to assist you in dying. But I think pulling the plug is different. I really do. I think that, if I'm on a respirator or all kind of machines and all of this type of thing, and that's the only thing that's keeping me alive, I don't want to live like that. I'm telling you that now in my right mind. I don't want to live like that. That the only thing that's keeping my lungs pumping and me breathing, the only thing that's keeping my heart beating, the only thing that's keeping my brain waves going is some machine? No. But I don't want nobody to kill me either. What I want you to do is pull the plug. Pull the plug. And my heart should stop beating if I'm not meant to live. My brain should now die and all of its brain cells. My lungs should stop pumping air throughout my body. And I should, within a matter of time, die. So that's different than assisted suicide. That's different than giving me some kind of pill, giving me some kind of elixir, giving me some kind of medicine in a hypodermic needle. It's different than putting a pillow over my head or whatever else you may use. It's different. That's a natural death. My body cannot sustain itself. That's a natural death. You took me off the machines. That's a natural death. No one injected me with anything. Nobody helped me die. You just took the tube out of my nose and out of my mouth and out of wherever else the tube was stuck in. And I died. Because the only reason I was alive, technically, is because of those machines. I really wasn't alive anyway, because the machine was pumping, the machine was doing this and that. The machine kept me alive. So if you pull the plug, and now I die, it's a natural death. That's different than what we're talking about here. So now we are dealing with terminal conditions that are now, the right to die movement feels, it's just too limited. We said terminal illness is when you have no more than about 6 months to a year to live. But they think that's just too limited. It's just too limited. A woman named Marilyn Sequel said this. She said there are two classifications of people. One who have a diagnosis of terminal illness and one who are in constant pain of suffering for which there is no hope of recovery. These are reasons to die, the dignity of death. She was a co-founder of the dignity of death, a dying with dignity movement of the 1990s. And she said there were two conditions that should allow someone life to be terminated. The first is that you have a terminal illness. And the second is that you're going through constant pain and suffering. In a recent fundraising letter issued by Compassion in Dying, Seattle, they stated that the newest battle after the battle of the Oregon right to die legislation was won, would be to secure the right to assisted suicide for people who are not within a few months of death by a terminal illness. So they're saying we want it to expand itself to more than that. They wanted to include any person who has been diagnosed by his or her physician with either a terminal illness or an incurable illness. Should be able to have an assisted suicide. So if you have a terminal illness and an incurable illness, now I'm going to show you how that incurable changes the face of things, if you will. The term incurable, that's a funny term, and it can lead to a lot of us being put to death. I was born with cerebral palsy. And there's no cure for cerebral palsy, no matter what level it's on, whether it's just a little limp or whether it affects your legs and your arm or one side of your body or whatever the case may be, whether you're unable to speak, whatever the case may be. Whatever level you're on, from moderate all the way to severe, anyone with cerebral palsy, there's no cure for cerebral palsy. There's no cure for lupus. Many conditions fall under the incurable label. Many of these conditions are not terminal, but they are incurable. So if your legislation, which Oregon has already done, state of Oregon has already done, they have included, as well as the right to die legislation, which they passed, they also included assisted suicide. And they said not just persons with terminal illness, but people with incurable illness or conditions, diseases or situations. Incurable. ASL is incurable. There's no pill, there's no medicine, there's nothing. Say for a miracle maybe, but there's nothing that you can do to eradicate ASL. And I can go on and on with all the disabilities, all the challenged abilities that are incurable. So now we go to a point where what incurable illness, and to what degree are you in that incurable illness where they believe that you should be assisted in committing suicide? Most of the people, let me say this, and then we go on. Most of the people I know who have physical challenges, including myself, have wondered from time to time, different parts of our time, and particularly those who have, not like myself, who was born with a disability, cerebral palsy, but have had a disability thrust upon them somewhere along the way. They have wondered, including myself, about the value of their life and of living. And yes, you become despondent at times. You become depressed at times. You become downhearted at times. You want to throw in the towel at times. Even at times you wonder about whether you should end this thing called life. But it doesn't. But in most instances, it does not remain in your spirit. It does not remain in your mind. It does not remain on your heart. For an extended length of time, even if it's a few years. I mean, some people, if you've been in a war, or some accident, and you've lost your legs or the ability to use your legs, you're quadriplegic, paraplegic, amputee, whatever the case may be, and you wonder, now my life's over. And particularly if you were athletic or you were very moved around and whatever else you may have cherished in your life. Now you're not able to do that like you once did, and you become despondent. What am I going to do now? And those thoughts come through your mind. Is my life worth living anymore? Does my life have value anymore? And those thoughts come in your mind. I believe they come in a lot of people's mind. You don't have to have a physical, developmental, or mental challenge to wonder whether your life's worth living. Or if you ever get out of the situation you're in to have a life of value and of purpose. We've all been there, but certainly people with physical, developmental, and mental challenges have certainly had to not only deal with the challenges of life, but the challenges of their bodies and the limitations of their bodies. And sometimes you may wonder, so I'm not being naive to think, we just shrug our shoulders and we press on, and there's no psychological impact upon our minds and upon our hearts and upon our spirits and our emotions. Yes, it touches all of that. And we've all been there. But when you end your life, it's over. And when there's time that you may have shaken off the depression. You may have shaken off the throwing in the towel attitude and spirit, the woe is me spirit and all the rest of that. And you may now be ready to move forward in your life, but now your life's over because you decided that your life weren't living, or someone else assisted you in ending your life because you were in a place at a particular time in your life where you were despondent, depressed. You wanted to throw in the towel. You wanted to give up. You wondered whether life was worth living. You may have even been suicidal in how you thought about your life. And for that moment, if somebody catches you in that moment, if they catch you in that season, if they catch you in that year where you feel that way, and then they end your life, let's say the next year you would have been out of it, or the next month you would have shaken it off, or the next day you have just forgotten about that and ready to move forward. But now you can't because your life's over. Your life's over. Whatever you could have been, you won't be. Whatever you could have achieved, you won't achieve. Whatever dream would have become a reality, it'll never be one for you because you've ended your life. Or you've allowed others to end your life for you, or end your life with you, or end your life in spite of you. The shift from terminal to incurable takes away the first safeguard. So if this thing was only about people who had terminal illnesses, well, you can take that away now. It takes that safeguard right away because now we include the incurable as well. And like I said before, who determines all of that? Today it may be decent people, maybe people with a moral compass, an ethical insight. But who's to say forever there'll be people that will deal with these issues and these people like that? How about if the world becomes a little more overpopulated, or your town or your city or your state or your nation becomes overly populated, and you start looking at it and determining who is expendable and who is not, whose life is valuable and whose life isn't. So that little word incurable can take on a sinister path. Terminal is one thing, incurable is another thing altogether. The next safeguard, because remember now we already said that terminal condition safeguard is no longer applies because it also includes incurable folk too. And incurable is any condition you have that will not be cured, that cannot be cured, that will not be cured with medication, with any kind of treatment. You were born with it. It happened to you. If you weren't born with it, it happened to you along the way. And things will not change for you, not in no foreseeable future. We don't know when a cure will come for any of these things. But for right now, there is none. So incurable makes this thing a little more sinister. Terminal is bad enough because who determines the terminal? I've seen people that were in a coma. I had a woman that they called me, and I was I was assistant pastor of a church there in Darby, a Mount Zion AME church, and one of the members, they weren't expecting to live. And so I went to there to really give her, because we didn't believe in last rites, but I went there to say the last, really I was thinking about saying the last prayer kind of thing, and people wanted me to come, pray over her and pray over the family, that God gives them strength as they go through, and almost like a what the Catholic would call a final rites prayer. But you know what I prayed? I didn't pray that kind of prayer. The Lord didn't lead me to pray that type of prayer. She said, I can't get those. Shirley, how you doing? She said, you can't get the computer to play video. Oh, my. But I didn't pray that kind of prayer for this lady. I said, Lord, you have your way. And let your will be done. Whatever that will may be. I submit to your will, not my will. I submit to your way, not my way. I ask that you allow the family to trust that your will be the perfect will for this young lady. She wasn't that young, but you know how you do. And you know what? That woman, who was a member of our usher board there at the church, she ended up leaving that hospital. She just died recently. I think she must have lived another 30 years or maybe more longer than that. After they chalked her off as being, this is it, this is the end for you. She was chalked off as being terminally ill. And they expected her to die. You just don't know. You can't be certain about anybody's life. We can't be judges of these situations. Not even ourselves. Because we don't know what our tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know what opportunities, what changes will come in our lives at any given time in our life. The next is physical pain. That's the next safeguard. Well, a person has to be in excruciating physical pain. Now, this too has also changed. It's now included emotional pain. In the Netherlands, for example, a depressed person was allowed an assisted suicide if you're just depressed. In Montana and in Idaho, at least 2 legislative approaches to the safeguard of physical was dropped. So they dropped the idea of physical pain from the legislation. Don't have to necessarily be in physical pain alone. It can be emotional. It can be psychological. It can be other sorts of pain that you're going through that can allow you to qualify for assisted suicide. A tape recording of the first person receiving euthanasia treatment after the implementation of the Oregon law, the DIE law, revealed that she demanded it not out of physical pain, but out of frustration about her diminishing mobility. So here's a woman. So her condition is making it harder to walk. Her condition is making it harder to move. Not about pain, it's just a mobility issue. And so Oregon, once again, they're the one leading the way in the right to die. They said this was a cause enough that if she wanted assisted suicide, they're considering her having that right. The danger for the disability community is that we broaden the application in the circle of people. Will it mean anybody with a disability? Anybody with an incurable disability? Anybody whose mobility or psychology or mental condition or developmental condition worsens? And then how far does it go? People with incurable diseases, well, everybody who has cerebral palsy, no matter what state they may be in, would they be qualified to say, I'm just tired of this, walking with a limp? I'm tired of being made fun of by my peers and by children and by adults. I'm tired of being rejected for job opportunities and for not being able to get into buildings and not being able to get here and there and everywhere I want to go. I'm tired of this kind of life, so I want to end it. How far will it go? And not just for the person, but those who decide for the person. Those who cannot decide for themselves. Maybe they're a child that cannot make that decision for themselves. They have to rely on their parents or rely on a legal guardian to make that decision for them. Will any disability do? Will any condition qualify? How far does it go? So the second safeguard, once again, has been eliminated too. Terminal condition, no. It also includes incurable. Physical pain, no. It also includes emotional pain, depression, fear of being less than you were, in mobility, in developmental, and in mental capacity. Your condition's getting worse, so before it gets too bad, I want to sign out of here, or someone wants to sign me out of here, or, they want to end my life, or help me end my life, or whatever the case may be. You remember the 4 categories: assisted suicide, voluntary euthanasia, involuntary euthanasia. And non-voluntary euthanasia. The third, remember we said there were 3 safeguards. First, terminal condition. We know that no longer applies. It also includes now incurable conditions. Number 2 was physical pain. Now we know that no longer applies. Good afternoon to my wife, Michelle. My sister, my wife, Michelle. God bless you, Michelle. So no longer applies to the second safeguard, which was you had to be in physical pain, extreme physical pain. Now you can be in extreme emotional pain. And you can still qualify for assisted suicide or voluntary suicide, or whatever the case may be. The next is consent and competent adult. This safeguard is taken away in many ways at the moment. This safeguard is too taken away. The most infamous case in the news at present is, of course, the Latimer case. Here, the Latimer murdered his daughter, Tracy, without consent. Now, you would think that the right to die movement would fight Latimer, as he has broken one of the most elementary safeguards in the euthanasia debate, which is consent. But if you read the literature of pro-euthanasia people over the years, you will not be surprised that they did not rally against him, but rather they rallied for him. They said his compassion was so great, his pain was so great by seeing her pain and her discomfort that he had no other choice but to kill her. Justifiable murder, if you will. Mercy killing, if you will. There are 2 other cases, one in Quebec, which is just our neighbors to the north in Canada. A mother drowned her son, who had autism, in the bathtub. The child was 6 years old. The mother was charged with manslaughter and received a suspended sentence. In British Columbia, a mother starved her daughter, Lynn Baker, 11, to death. Now, the daughter had a genetic condition called Rett syndrome. This syndrome causes the person who has it not to feel like eating. So the mother used the medical condition as a rationale because she said that her daughter did not want to eat. So she decided to let her starve to death. She didn't want to eat. That's her syndrome. That's her condition. She didn't want to eat. So she don't have to eat. So she allowed her to starve to death. Involuntary manslaughter was the accusation, but she was set free on a suspended sentence. Because the jury thought that it wasn't manslaughter, it was just a mother who saw her child suffering and allowed her child to die. The fourth, quote, safeguard, self-determination. Self-determination when, I'm deciding I want to die. And how is it you can determine that I shouldn't die? As I told you, as I said before, Many times when we get like that, and many of us have been there when we've been depressed. Many of us who have physical challenges, many of us who have life challenges, don't have to have a physical challenge or a developmental challenge or a mental challenge to go through a sense of suicide and thinking that life's not worth living and how am I going to get out of the situation I'm in and all of this type of thing that you feel. And you feel as though I should end this. And I should have the right to end it if I want to. Self-determination. That you have a right to say, enough's enough, I'm going to kill myself. Enough, I'm gonna have somebody kill me. I'm gonna give somebody a gun and let them shoot me. Enough's enough, I'm gonna ask a doctor to give me a lethal dose of some drug that will assure that I will die. The problem with this is, based on this argument for legalization of assisted suicide on self-determination, or just you killing yourself, voluntary suicide we call it, voluntary euthanasia, is the fact that though we have a right to live whatever life we choose to live, we have to understand that suicide, committing suicide, is irreversible. Suicide, whether it's assisted, whether it's voluntary, euthanasia, whatever you call it, whatever it is, it's irreversible. Now let's address the point that discrimination exists if society does not find ways for people with disabilities to commit suicide. That's ridiculous. It's not discrimination if you decide that I'm not going to be involved in such an action. If someone kills themselves and they call it committing suicide for whatever reason, it's not justified. It's not given a sanction for it to be approved. Even if you may feel it's justified, the person themselves may feel it's justified. I can't take it anymore, whatever the case may be. Nevertheless, it's never justified. And self-determination is not enough of a safeguard in the sense of you're protecting a person's right to decide to die if they want to. I think euthanasia in every form, all of its four forms, is a sticky wicket. It's very delicate. It can lead to something ferocious and atrocious. It can lead to people determining for you, or putting in your mind that you're not. Because there's a lot of people that do that too. You think about it, but then you ask a doctor who believes in this assisted suicide, like Dr. Kevorkian and others who kind of convince you, yeah, that's the best. If that's how you feel, and you really feel it's hopeless, and you have every right to do this, and you have every right to do that. Be careful. Because after you done gone, they done moved on with their life. They keep it on going on. They're making the most out of life. They're getting the most out of life after they've done convinced you that what you're thinking for the moment is how you should be thinking, and I help you get it done. Many people with disabilities are suicidal because of, ironically, society's attitudes towards them. If society was more accepting and more inclusive and more embracing and open up doors and opportunities for persons with challenged abilities, the challenged ability would not be as challenging as it is now. I really believe in my heart of heart the worst disability that a person with a disability can have. Good afternoon, Kimberly. The worst thing they can do is to deal with the issues that society puts on them. That's more debilitating than your disability. People's attitudes and their lack of compassion and understanding and acceptance is more debilitating than any disability you may have. So society itself, the ones that's cheering you on to commit suicide, the one that's saying, I'll help you do it, are the very ones that in themselves are creating this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness and defeat. And particularly for those who are trying to have assistive ending their lives through assisted suicide because of depression. You're depressed because of circumstances around you. And circumstances around you are many times dictated by the people that are around you. And particularly people in society itself. My daughter Kimberly's on. So God bless you, Kimberly. Got a sister, my wife, and now my daughter's on. Thank you. But we have to understand another issue I want to deal with very quickly. I want to deal with this, then we'll be through. I think we're about through now. We'll deal with this another time. It's after 4 o'clock. But we're going to deal with, is abortion justified when the unborn baby is disabled? Is abortion justified? We talk about the other forms of death. Is abortion justified when a baby is born disabled? And once again, to what degree must a child be born? Because keep in mind, now they can tell in the mother's womb that the child's going to have cerebral palsy or have Down syndrome, but you won't know until the child's out of the womb what kind of function they will have in their lives, what kind of person they'll be. You can't tell that right there in the womb off times. So when is it justified to abort because the baby is disabled? And we're going to be talking about that next time on Monday. What was this, Monday now? We'll talk about it on Friday. Friday at 3 o'clock. We're also going to deal with this fact of fetus. When does life really begin? If a mother is carrying her child in her belly and she's killed, the person that's accused of the murder will oftentimes go to jail or have to go to court and have to and be accused of murdering the mother only and not the child. Many states say it takes a child to have to breathe outside the mother's womb for it to be classified as a human being. But when have you ever known a fetus produced by 2 human beings to be anything but a human being once it's born? So what is it when it's in the mother's womb? A non-human? A fetus? An embryo? If it is an embryo, it's a human embryo. If it's a fetus, it's a human fetus. I've never seen a person, a man and a woman, create a child and is born a chimpanzee. I've never seen it born a cat or a dog, or orangutan or flea. Every time a woman and a man lay down and they conceive a child, that child is born a human being. A male or a female as its mother and father are. But we'll talk about that next time and so much more. Please continue to pray for the people in Texas, particularly around the Gulf Coast, Corpus Christi and Houston. The people in Florida, the people in the Caribbean, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and all those islands that lead up to Florida. that were devastated by both Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma. And bless those who may be touched by Hurricane Jose, that's pending as we speak, strengthening as we speak. That whoever, if anyone is ever impacted by it, that they too will be safe and secure. So continue to pray for them and be with us on Friday, 3 p.m. here on Facebook Live with Chatting with the G-Man. Until then, be blessed and have a glorious week. And see you on Friday.